So welcome and thank you for joining us for this virtual talk by Dr. Heather Price on climate justice integrated learning in STEM. Dr. Price joins us from North Seattle College, where she is a professor of chemistry and leads the Climate Justice Project. Through the Climate Justice Project, Dr. Price designs and facilitates curriculum development workshops, assisting faculty in incorporating climate justice, equity, and community and civic engagement into their curriculum. Dr. Price's PhD is in analytical chemistry from the University of Washington, where she focused on long-range transport and photochemistry of air pollution, and her postdoctoral work was with the University of Washington's program on climate change, where she did work on the global chemical transport model GeoSChem that's maintained at Harvard and the University of Washington. Please welcome Dr. Price. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay. Oh, good. I'm not on mute. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Russ. And I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm hoping that we're going to have plenty of time for discussion of these topics around incorporating climate justice and also civic engagement into our STEM courses. This work is thanks to a National Science Foundation IUS grant, so Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, that my colleague Sonia Doucette and I have. Sonia Doucette is at Bellevue College and I'm at North Seattle College, and we've both been doing this work at our respective colleges for a few years. Sonia started it at Bellevue back in 2018, and then I joined the project about a year later and brought it to the Seattle colleges. And I've also been teaching it at University of Washington, so working with faculty at these three institutions, and I'll share as we go from there. And it's also curriculum for the bioregion is kind of where this work began. Curriculum for the Bioregion is an organization of STEM faculty and sustainability. It's housed out of Western Washington University and run by Dr. Grace Wong at WWU right now. And then we also work closely with Sensor, which is Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities. And Sensor is really bringing together science and those civic and community engagements. And so they've been supportive of our work, and we'll continue from there. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. And I'm in Seattle, so this will be centered around Seattle, but I do encourage you to look up what land are you on. So on behalf of North Seattle College and Bellevue College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. So I encourage you to look up whose land are you on. In Washington here, we also have organizations that allow us to pay real rent for the land that we're occupying. And first, I want to start off by kind of going through some introductions. I'd like to know where you are and what you're teaching. What kind of courses do you teach? And are you already incorporating climate justice and civic engagement or civic engagements into your STEM courses? And if not, have you ever thought about it? So if you can kind of maybe drop into the chat answers to these questions, that would be great to know where folks are at. Do we have access to the chat?
We do have access to the chat, and people can also unmute themselves and talk as well. And I can start. I teach a class here at Penn State called Math for Sustainability, and I do attempt to include issues of climate justice and ethics. One of the topics that I like to explore with students in relation to climate change is how we discount the future, and as a math topic, the discount rate and the debate over what discount rate is appropriate as you try to look at future costs or future impacts of climate change is an interesting starting point for me in these debates about justice and ethics of climate change.
Thanks so much, Russ. So that's good to know. You're already incorporating this into it. So I have some ideas for others.
That one example.
Yeah, that's great though. How about anybody else want to share? Or you can drop it in the chat. I see Charles has dropped his in the chat, says, welcome virtually to Penn State. Charlie Anderson, the Sustainability Council Chair in the College of Science. And I don't know if you want to share if you're teaching as well, or if you're...
I'll follow up. Hi, everybody. So I am located at University Park campus at Penn State, just like Russ is, and I teach introductory plant biology, as well as graduate courses in cell biology. And my research deals with plant cell walls in the context of bioenergy and sustainable food production. So my research is very sustainability oriented, but my teaching is less so. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to incorporate research into teaching.
Thanks so much, Charles. I see Kevin has dropped his in the chat, says St. Leo University, teach a bunch of math courses, mostly gen ed, but a few majors. And while I don't usually integrate climate justice into my courses outside of a small example here and there, I've overseen a senior project on climate change. So thank you for that, Kevin. And then Albina or Gordon, do you want to share in the chat or take yourself off mute?
Gordon did share in the chat.
I missed it. Go ahead.
Yep. Gordon does not teach, but he's practices a practicing statistics consultant with a fair bit of his work inside national parks and emphasizing non-invasive monitoring.
Great. So he's on the front lines of it. Welcome, Gordon. And Avina, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please correct me. Maybe they'll join in later. All right. So it sounds like folks are already at least thinking about it or bringing climate into their teaching, and hopefully I'll be able to show you some other examples of what this looks like for what we're doing out here in Seattle as well. So in terms of an outline, I'll just really quickly talk a little bit about where we are in this era of fossil fueled climate change. I think most of us already are there, and then why. I want to spend most of the time on why climate justice in STEM, and also why civic engagement. So the National Science Foundation grant that Sonia and I have is called, the acronym is C-Justice, and it stands for Climate Justice in Undergraduate STEM, Incorporating Civic Engagement. And I'll give a little bit of background, an overview of that, some examples of how the faculty we work with, and then our own classes, how we're incorporating climate justice and civic engagements into our classes. And then we even have some preliminary results. So we just finished year one of the grant, and we've got results from one quarter, so it's not a lot. They're very preliminary, but they're also very encouraging. So I'm happy to be able to share a little bit of that too. So a little bit of background about me. As Russ explained, I'm an atmospheric chemist and a climate scientist. So I was trained at University of Washington, and the dress that I'm wearing is climate data. I'm wearing global climate data. I'm on the right. And then my friend Helene is wearing the climate data for France. And blue is cold, red is hot. And this is just a nice illustration of taking math and taking sustainability and art and combining them and showing how climate can touch all of the topics that we're teaching, right? You can collaborate with your art colleagues to provide them with the data, and then they can create art around that. And it could be a dress, could be a scarf, could be just a piece of art, things like that. And the climate stripe data comes from a colleague at University of Reading, Ed Hawkins. And so I encourage you can find for Pennsylvania, he has each state what the climate stripes look like, and they all go from blue to red. It's about 1.3 to 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in the data set. And think about it, these are land data, so it warms more over land than it has over the oceans. And so we see a higher rise compared to what we've seen average globally. And I'm pretty active on social media. I do a lot of science outreach and education. And this is a tweet from Twitter, that a post that I made back in 2019 when the carbon dioxide level, so it reaches a peak in May. So we're headed for a new peak. And at that time in May of 2019, the peak was 415 parts per million. Compared to when I was born, it was 326 parts per million. And even just my tweet is a great way to engage the public, to engage our students in things like units, things like concentrations versus emissions, and helping the public and our students to understand the differences between these. And for those of you that aren't familiar, ppm is parts per million. So if you had a balloon with 1 million particles of air, when I was born, the levels were 326. So there were 326 particles of carbon dioxide, molecules of carbon dioxide in that balloon when I was born. And if you took a balloon in 2019, there would have been 415. So it went up by almost an ice age change just in my lifetime. Anybody that's over 55 has seen an ice age level change in carbon dioxide, and in the other direction, right? We're not getting colder, we're getting hotter. And we're still, if you've been paying attention to what's going on with the IPCC, we're still raging on in terms of the increase in concentration and that buildup over time. And this is the temperature. We know carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and we have these lovely graphs for math students. They could see about fitting, hey, does this fit a parabola? Does this fit exponential growth or linear growth? So there's lots of ways that math faculty can take these data sets and help students, or if they're in statistics, what's the average? What's the standard deviation? Things like that. These are annual averages. And that blue circle, 1976, is the only colder than average year of my life when I was a toddler. Every year of my life has been hotter than the 20th century average. And so that's another thing, right? You could get the data set, have your students calculate the average over a century or over different periods of time. And then you can see that exponential rise since then. And 2021 is yet another record-breaking year. So for our students, where most of our students are under 30, or anyone under 45 has never lived on Earth during a colder than average year, at least based on the average of the 20th century. So we're in a hot new world, and we were just born into it. And these climate chickens are coming home to roost. 1 in 3 Americans experienced a climate disaster in 2021, just last year, from the, let's see, wait till it loops back so you can start from the beginning of the year. So we can see that in February, there was the extreme cold that came down all the way into Texas. Then we had scorching heat in June, followed by wildfire smoke, which apparently made it all the way out to you as well. And then Hurricane Ida, which came all the way up into New York and New Jersey, flooding people's basements and homes and whole streets. And yeah, so 1 in 3 Americans have now experienced a climate disaster just in 1 year. And the climate change is marching on, right? Fossil fuel climate change is not slowing down. In fact, it's accelerating at a time when the IPCC report is clear that the peak in emissions needs to happen sometime in the next about 5 years in order to really be able to have that soft landing and to minimize harm. And it's, people talk about, oh, no planet B. Well, it's humans, right? The reason we care about this is for our own survivability. And so that's where climate justice comes in. And climate justice, I'll talk more about this, but essentially it's taking action for a just transition, that transition to electrify everything, to decarbonize, and recognizing the disproportionate effects of fossil fueled climate change that is already here and affecting marginalized groups today and will be affecting future generations in the years and decades to come. And so to continue, why climate justice in STEM? Well, we've been following the work of Ebony McGee. She wrote this article, The Equity Ethic, Black and Latinx College Students Reengineering Their STEM Careers Toward Justice. And it's this idea of when you include an equity ethic in your teaching, it gives students a sense of purpose for why they're learning math or other STEM disciplines, chemistry. And I think it's illustrated by this quote in the book talking about leaving. This is from 1997. And this is a quote from a student, a high achieving Black student who left engineering. And he says, quote, "A big concern of a lot of Black students is we feel like we're being prepared to go into white corporate America and it won't really help our community. We won't have the opportunity through our careers to give back to community. Anything that we do for the community would be outside of our academic field, and that's a very serious concern." And then the feedback that Sonia and I are getting from our students who are now learning with this equity ethic, their chemistry, their math, is that this is leading to persistence, where the students are persisting through their STEM courses we teach at community colleges, and then we're seeing the success as they start their academic careers at University of Washington or other four-year universities in fields like chemical engineering, computer science, mathematics, some of the other core STEM disciplines. And so the next thing I want to do is see where are we in terms of what's called the Global Warming 6 Americas. If you have a phone, you can use your QR to take the quiz up here next to take the quiz, or Russ, if you can drop it in the chat. There it is. And then that's the Jamboard where you can enter your outcome, or because we're such a small group, we could also just drop it in the chat if you want. So here, I'm going to go ahead and here's the survey to take. And this is a survey from Yale Climate Communications that has been surveying Americans since about 2010 on whether they are alarmed or cautious, disengaged, doubtful, concerned, or dismissive about climate change, about global warming. And then let me go ahead and go to the SASE survey so we can see what folks are putting up. So hopefully it looks something like this. And then all you need to do is you go over here and you can grab a sticky note, enter in, and mine is alarmed. And you can pick whatever color you want. And then you can drop yours in for how did your result come up. Yeah, and this is pretty typical for when Sonia and I give talks that most folks come out alarmed, and our students do too. The person who leads the group, Anthony Leisowitz at Yale, I remember taking this survey when he was developing it when he was still in Oregon, and now if we look, let me go ahead and come back to our PowerPoint. What we find is that it used to be that the alarmed were only about 12% of the population back when Anthony first started taking, these surveys. And today, the alarmed are bouncing back and forth depending on the year when between the concerned and the alarmed. In 2019, alarmed were the highest group, and now over 50% of people in America are either alarmed or concerned about global warming. So that concern is on the rise. And there's a difference that we see based on where a person is in terms of whether they're Hispanic, Black, or white. The Hispanic and Black Americans are more concerned and more alarmed about global warming than white Americans. And this makes sense, that there are disproportionate impacts on communities of color compared to white communities. And so of course, they're going to be more concerned about global warming and the health impacts that come from it. And these are also our students. So this is Shia Bastida. She is, I believe, a student at Penn State right now. And she was a speaker at Biden's climate summit last spring. And while she was there, this is a quote from her speech. She said, quote, "We demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and indigenous wisdom, historical movements, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living." And she's also a climate activist. So she has been involved with the Fridays for Future movement, which came out of Greta Thunberg's work and also Jamie Margolin's work. She's at UPenn. Oh, good. Thank you for clarifying. So she is at University of, rather than Penn State. And then this is Alexandria Villaseñor. She's still in high school, and this is her quote. "My generation needs to know the unique risks and vulnerabilities we are facing. That must be part of our education. You grown-ups need to get it together to improve school curricula, to teach us about what's happening to our planet and how to mitigate the climate crisis." And I believe she's in California. This is a colleague of mine, Sarah Myrie, a climate scientist, also from University of Washington, and she was a Drawdown senior fellow and is director of the Rowan Institute. And she says, quote, "I should not be expected to be objective about the kind of world I'm leaving my child. What a shitty ancestor. What a bad job you're doing if you're going to sit on the sidelines and document the world burning around you." And then this is a young person. If you've heard about the 21 young people who are suing the US government over a stable, livable climate, this is one of them. His name is Aji Piper, and he's here in Seattle, but the young people, the 21 young people, are all around the United States, including many on the East Coast. And he says, quote, "Our federal government has not been held accountable for their gross failure to protect the life and the future life on this earth, forcing us children to take drastic actions to procure the needed motivation in order to save life on this planet." Oh, and thank you, Charles, for dropping in Penn State's Drawdown Scholars Program. That's a great program. And then finally, Vanessa Nakate. She's a Ugandan climate justice activist. And she says, quote, "We cannot achieve climate justice without racial justice." And then Mary Anais Heglar is a writer and also a co-host of a podcast called Real Hot Take. So I recommend reading her work if you haven't discovered her work yet. Quote, "It's not just time to talk about climate. It's time to talk about it as the Black issue it is. It's time to stop whitewashing it. In other words, it's time to stop all lives mattering, the climate crisis." And so to continue, I want to give a little bit of background into the climate justice project, the NSF project that Sonia and I are working on, and then give you some examples, and then we can open it up to a discussion. And so the Climate Justice and Undergraduate STEM Incorporating Civic Engagement, this NSF grant, is at the intersection of a climate justice faculty curriculum that Sonia and I both teach at our colleges, and I should also include University of Washington in here, that I've been teaching it there for 2 years. And then also censor that previous NSF project that is science education for new civic engagements and responsibilities. They have a quarterly or biannual publication that I encourage people to look into. And then there's also the equity ethic, which comes from Ebony McGee's work with Lydia Bentley, that gets into those disproportionate effects and also what motivates our students for retention and success. And so teaching through climate justice, I've been teaching climate in my classes, my chemistry classes, since the late 90s and early 2000s. And I used to think that just teaching the science was going to be enough. And then I started to incorporate the climate justice pieces, like the disproportionate effects, and thought, oh, that's going to be enough. When in reality, now I realize that no, we also need to have that civic engagement piece. To only give our students the problem isn't enough. We also need to give them the tools for how to address these problems that we're teaching them. And that's where that civic or community engagement piece is. And I'll give some details about examples of what that looks like. It's not service learning. It's not field trips, things like that. It's different. And the importance that it goes beyond small scale personal actions, right? That whole individual versus the collective, and really toward talking about how those small scale personal actions can ripple out to reshape the very systems that really need to change. And our lessons make clear to students the connections between fossil fueled climate change and the racial, the equity, the justice, economic, and other forms of injustice. So we use this framing from Ravi Kanbar, where he goes in and he specifies the difference between inter versus intra-generational climate justice, where intergenerational climate justice has to do with between generations. Like this photo here is showing my children on the right with their cousins and their great grandma. So you could think about intergenerational climate justice as well, the grandma's generation and their the things that they've done that are going to impact generations to come, their resource use. Whereas intra-generational climate justice has to do with impacts, climate impacts for everyone who is living today, all of us, regardless of whether we're a baby or a great grandma. We're all part of this generation, and we all have a part to play either in perpetuating the climate crisis, adapting to it, mitigating it, right? We all are part of that. And so in terms of intra-generational climate justice, I've created this wedge diagram where each of these wedges either makes it easier or harder for a community or a person to contend with this boulder that is representing the climate impact. So things like education, gender, race, ability, employment, food or nutrition, healthcare, housing. As people lack these different, right, if you don't have employment, if you're unemployed, yet wedge is going to get really big and it's going to get harder and harder to contend with that boulder of climate impact. And again, it's not enough just to talk about the climate impact. We also have to think about the tools to reduce those wedges, to make it easier for our students and our communities to contend with the climate impact. So, I think about if a doctor only gave us test results or our nurses only gave us test results, that's not enough. They don't just give us test results. They also teach us how to heal and repair and restore. And we as professors should be doing the same for our students. It's not enough for us to just give them the test results. We need to teach them what to do with it, or at least give them the tools so they have some idea of what they can do with it. Because action feeds hope, and you can't have hope without action. And so our lessons also help our students learn how to be engaged civically within their communities beyond the classroom, on the topic of climate justice that they're learning in the class. And this is not service learning. Sonia and I follow the work of Wang and Jackson, a paper in 2005. I can share a link to that. And in Wang and Jackson, they go through and they have this kind of star of engaged citizen, and the things that make an engaged citizen, such as knowledge, knowing what to do and why, the responsibility, feeling a sense of responsibility to do because only I can do things like that, a commitment, the skill, efficacy, value, all of these different things. And then Sonia and I added action because that wasn't included in their framework. And examples of these are shown in the images over here, things like protest, calling representatives, speaking with friends and family, roommates, wearing buttons, even just wearing a button. I have a colleague at Children's Hospital here, and he's a professor at the medical school, and he wears a button that says, ask me about the connections between climate and children's health. So there's lots of ways to have our students engage in community, or even posting on Twitter, like my post about my life in carbon dioxide. And then this is just an example of the workshops that Sonia and I teach at our respective colleges. So Sonia has been doing this work at Bellevue College since 2017, 2018. And then I've been doing this at North Seattle College and at University of Washington since about 2019, 2020. And we have a lot of faculty who have created lessons that are integrating climate justice and then more recently civic engagements into their curriculum. At Bellevue College, Sonia has trained 165 faculty. So these are her numbers through 2021. She's got even more through 2022. I've worked with 41 faculty at North Seattle College, and then I've worked with 23 faculty at University of Washington over the past 2 years. And so that means there's, over 200 200 classes at our respective colleges and university that now integrate climate justice. And these are courses such as atmospheric sciences, engineering, mathematics, statistics, physics, biology, chemistry. And we also are really intentional about bringing together STEM and humanities faculty. I'm not showing any of the humanities faculty lessons, but it's really important to us that they work together. Because what I found is, and Sonia and I found is that, and it's harder for us too, in the sciences and STEM, it's not as natural to bring in the social justice, climate justice, and civic engagements as it is for our colleagues who are in art and history and political science. And so by bridging the disciplines, we learn from them and they learn from us. And so it's really important when I have a group of 10 faculty, I'm not going to put my 5 humanities in one breakout room and my STEM in another. I'm going to mix them up. So I have 3 STEM and 3 humanities, and then 3 STEM and 3 humanities together, working together, learning from each other. And here's at Bellevue College, this is what a typical year looks like. In the summer, Sonia will run 3 to 4 day curriculum development workshops for faculty and or staff. Those days are spaced. They're not consecutive all in the same week. Faculty need time to think about the work that they're doing, time to explore and look for examples, case studies that they want to pull into their class. Each of us has different ways of teaching, different styles, right? One person might want to do a lab, another person might want to have students watching videos and analyzing that and creating data sets from that. And so the one that I'm teaching this quarter, I met with a faculty group on Friday. I'll meet with them again, not next Friday, but the Friday after. And then in between, I have office hours where we can continue the discussion. They do readings, watch videos. And day one is all about learning about what's climate justice and what civic engagements. Day 2 is where they build the scaffold for their lesson. So that we walk them through a brainstorm from the curriculum for the bioregion, where they're just building that outline. Day 3, again, is more discussion around what does it look like? What are some examples of curriculum that's been done before? And then on day 4 of the workshop, they present out what they've created for their lesson. And then we follow up with them after they've taught their lesson. They do a post survey with their students, and then they also do a post survey of the faculty. So to capture both of those pieces for them. And that we do this with both humanities and with STEM faculty. And Sonia's doing this every quarter at Bellevue. Bellevue is one of the biggest colleges in our state in Washington. At North Seattle College, I teach them twice a year. And at University of Washington, we've just begun, and I've taught it during the winter quarters. And that I've now trained a new faculty to continue with that, since our NSF grant is focused on the community college, but we're hoping to expand it out to more and more of the 4-year universities. And then at Bellevue, there's also book discussion. So they have the funding to be able to purchase books for faculty, which is a really nice way to also give some of the humanities faculty ideas for what to bring into their classes. And so this is just a small sampling of some of the books that have been part of those book discussions. And again, this has been going on since 2018. So there's many other books that aren't even shown in here. Books like, I think another one that they did is Braiding Sweetgrass. And my college is reading this one right now, but I'm showing the ones from Bellevue, from Sonia's. And then here's the faculty from Bellevue who have been involved. So 54 arts and humanities faculty and 50 in science. So it's mostly the science faculty, humanities faculty, and then there's about 17 from social science. And I have about similar ratios from North Seattle College as well. And again, here's some of those examples of a few, and this is just a very small subset, right? We've got over 200 lessons, and I'm just showing you a real small number here. And then the way that the workshops, what we have faculty do is the first thing we want them to do is figure out, well, what class do they want to incorporate climate justice and civic engagements into? And we have them brainstorm what is a concept or a skill or a set of concepts and skills that you want your students to get from this class. So for my general chemistry course for STEM majors, I want them to understand the concept of stoichiometry, and I want them to understand the shapes of molecules in the first quarter. And then the skills around that are things like dimensional analysis, determining significant figures, right? Those calculations that they're going to be doing. And then around shapes of molecules, can they draw those molecules? Can they balance those equations? Things like that. So these are skills that don't yet have to do with climate, but I then want my faculty to then connect it to climate and to climate justice and civic engagements. But we first have to ground in the discipline. And the way that we do that next is, so once they've decided on what topic and what class, have them go through the drawdown book. And now there's, I know, Russ, you can drop the link to the drawdown project. We give each faculty a copy of the book and or point them to the website. So this is what the book looks like. The prices come down. So I think it's like $16 for the paper version, but it's also online, which is a great resource. Russ, are you able to drop that, or I can drop it?
Yes, sorry,
Oh, that's okay.
Working on it right now.
No hurry. And then here's the list of civic and community engagement ideas that Sonia and I and the faculty we work with have come up with. And both of these are living lists, right? This list of climate justice ideas started from drawdown, but it's growing every quarter. And we, when we go to do the workshops, we pull out each of these bullet points and give an example of what that looks like for the faculty in the workshops. And faculty are constantly adding to this. Same thing with the civic and community engagements. This is a living document that has grown out of the work with our faculty and from our own classes. And some examples, I think it's the climate justice ideas are pretty easy for faculty to come up with. We all have the things that we're interested in. I think what gets a little more challenging is how do we then give our students those tools? And so here I wanted to make sure to share with you some examples of how that's done. In my class, when my students are learning about gases and the shapes of molecules, I have them watch a video on fossil fueled climate change. This is from a talk I gave at Bastyr University, or I'll have them watch other videos on climate or on the greenhouse gases. And then I have them look up what their carbon dioxide birthday is. And I have them look up what the carbon dioxide birthday of someone in their family or a friend who's at least 10 years older or younger, so that then they can compare what it was their CO2 level when they were born versus when they were 15 years old. And for great grandma, there's not going to be a very big difference in the CO2 level. But for a kid born today, there's going to be a really big difference. Because you think about the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, over half of all the fossil fuel emissions have been pumped into the atmosphere from burning coal, oil, gas, all of these greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels, half of them since 1990, which is when Nirvana's song Smells Like Teen Spirit came out. So if you remember that song, if you're old enough to remember when that song came out, then half of all fossil fuel emissions have come into the atmosphere since then. So that then kind of shows that exponential growth, which is another nice thing to bring into a class. You could also have the graph and have the students integrate to figure out, well, what concentration do you expect, or what are the emissions, right? There's so many things you can do mathematically and statistically with some of that data. But I'm looking at just 2 points. These are chemistry students, so and these are STEM students, but it's first quarter, and they're not expected to have had calculus yet, so I don't get into calculus with them. And then I have them discuss this with somebody, right? This is then bringing what they're learning in class home, and it's educating not just themselves, but their community. Another community engagement. So this is me with, so this is Marcus Bose, who's a professor at the medical school at University of Washington, and then a student here on the left, meeting with people, the staff of our state senator. And so just another example, of sharing what we're sharing about the impacts of climate and health in this particular meeting. Other examples of civic or community engagement is getting involved with local organizations. At University of Washington, Institutional Climate Action is a group of students. It's student-led, but it also includes faculty and alumni. There's community groups such as Front and Centered out here in Seattle that are involved in creating an annual community report on environmental justice. Got Green is also part of Front and Centered. If you've heard of Climate Change Makers, this is led by a former climate scientist from University of Washington that helps people to meet with their legislators and gives people a sense of community around how to do that work with just like 45 minutes or an hour a week. And then 350 Seattle, there's, I'm sure, 350 organizations on the East Coast as well. And 350 stands for the carbon dioxide level that climate scientists recognize as the safe level, which we passed when I was in high school. Because now we're at, today, 420 parts per million. So we've climbed the ladder, we got to come back down. Again, protest. So these are students from University of Washington who are part of that institutional climate action. They're working on pushing the University of Washington and other state colleges to divest from fossil fuels. And they had a protest at school to do that. And then once faculty have picked what is their climate justice idea, what is the civic engagement that they think that they want to incorporate into their class, this is the template that they're going to fill out. So they come up with their skill, they come up with their climate justice idea, their civic engagement, and then they put it all together in a module. And in that module, they're going to answer things like, what are the engaging pedagogies that you're going to want to use in your class? And that's going to be different for every professor, right? In my chemistry class, maybe I want to incorporate it into a lab. In a biology class, maybe they do want to do a field trip. In a math class, maybe they're working with Desmos or with some other online program for math. And then that also bleeds into the activities, assignments, research experiments that you want your students to conduct. What technologies are going to support that work, whether it's carbon dioxide monitors like mine here, which is getting a little high in my room, 1,000 ppm. I need to open a window. And then the different resources. So things like these CO2 monitors, I was able to apply for a grant and my college paid for these. So now every student gets to take one of these home to be able to do their own research around this. And we also incorporate undergraduate research into our general chemistry, but we're in a college that has 26 students in a classroom. So we have the capability to be able to do that for each student. In a larger university, maybe you have research groups of students of 5 or 6 and one takes it and they work together, things like that. So there's other ways to do that. Or they can look up data, things like the Purple Air Network, and then what metacognitive strategies might be embedded. And some examples of this, I'll start with a math example. This is Malini Ajwani. She's a professor of mathematics at Bellevue College, and she has a number of short climate justice math problems that she has her students do. She says that she tends to put these at the end of the class as a filler or at the beginning of class as a warm-up. And this is just one example. She has so many that she uses, but I liked this one in that it has all of these different pieces, right? It's helping students to interpret and calculate word problems. This one example I'm showing here is how the climate justice issue is educating girls and women. And then the civic and community engagement is that students could then have a discussion about ways to improve educational opportunities for girls. And so it just walks through, a number of different short math problems. She also had some in there on agriculture, where students were calculating if they know the length and the width of a field, how many hectares there would be. And then they're also learning about agricultural impacts on climate, just lots of different ideas for how to connect math. Another idea is, and I think I mentioned this before, if you have the amount of carbon that's going into the atmosphere, or if you know what trajectory you have, you can integrate under the curve to find out the amount, right? You can area under the curve, so students can be connecting this to calculus first quarter with derivatives, and then also second quarter with integrating. Or at least that's where our students do their. And then this is just another connection showing how she connects it. So every one of the lessons that faculty submit, they include an instructor guide, so other instructors know how to use their, and this is the instructor guide from her work. And then the link to the drawdown health and education piece. And so she's come up with an assignment almost for every one of those solutions in drawdown. It's pretty cool. This is an example of what I do. This is for my Allied Health Intro to Chemistry course 121. I weave it through my entire course. So pretty much every chapter has a connection to climate justice and to civic engagements. The main civic engagement that I do in my class is to have my students discuss what they learn in class with friends or family. And then they relate that back either through an assignment or through a discussion post with fellow students. The latest one that my students are working on is indoor air quality and the health impacts of methane gas. So when they learn about the shapes of molecules like a methane molecule, they also learn that, oh, well, methane, that's the principal gas that is in quote unquote natural gas. And they learn about the human health impacts of natural gas, things like the fact that air pollution from burning fossil fuels is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths, premature deaths worldwide, and that in the United States, that's 950 deaths each day. They can look at the data from this GeosChem. This comes out of work from Harvard's Chan School of Public Health. And so for the students that are further along, they can actually read these articles, they can access that data and do some data analysis around it. And for other students, such as in my Chemistry 121 students, I'm not going to have them read that, but it's enough for them to watch some videos around health and climate. And then it's connecting what they're going to be doing future as a healthcare worker. They also learn that children living in homes with gas stoves face comparable risk of asthma to children living in a household with cigarette smoke, and how the Massachusetts Department of Public Health now recognizes that gas stoves in the home are a leading trigger for asthma for children, for developing asthma. So, and for healthcare workers, this is really important information for them to know about, right? So many children have asthma today. In both my and Sonia's Chemistry 161 classes, we also tie in the summertime smoke. And we have, again, there's the Purple Air monitoring network. So I encourage you to check out Purple Air if you haven't before. It's just at Purple Air. Oh, that wasn't a hyperlink, but I'm sure you can grab it and look at it. And then Sonia Doucette also has her students learn about disproportionate effects of air pollution through a case study of Mongolia. And she and I both weave through different case studies throughout our chemistry classes, whether it's first quarter, second or third, or if you're in a semester system, first and second semester. The case study that she has is looking at Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and it's following, starts out with a documentary. So she starts out with what is the problem, what is the climate justice issue, and then she connects it to the chemistry that the students are doing, and then to the civic engagement piece. And then she has her students, and then I'm doing this also in my class. After the students have watched the documentary, they, in a discussion post with other students, answer questions about what are your thoughts and reactions? What chemistry did you see in the story? So this is the first thing that they're doing when they come to class, and they're starting to make the connections between real life, everyday events and chemistry. And the same thing could happen with math or with statistics or with other areas, biology, things like that. And then just more cases, looking at Cancer Alley in Louisiana, looking at PM 2.5 in other parts of the US, looking at temperature and climate and disproportionate effects, things like that. And then the importance of bringing in current events. So I live in Seattle, so we bring in a lot of information about what's local. So if you're in Pennsylvania, you're going to want to look up what are some of the climate disasters, sea level rise, has there been a heat wave, things like that that are getting exacerbated by fossil fuel climate change, and have the students learn through those local events. And on the West Coast, we've been getting these smoke events that I was born and raised here. We did not have these when I was little. This is very recent, and it is climate exacerbated for sure. Climate supercharged. This is about 20 minutes from where I live. And so these smoke events are getting closer and closer. The person who I taught at University of Washington with, his home in Colorado was burned down in the wildfires last year. his family home that his parents live in. So, and they don't live in the woods. They live in a suburban part of Colorado that burned down. And so it's starting to affect not just forested areas, but urban areas as well. And then the importance of presenting good news. These are a couple of examples that Sonia has incorporated into her class, but I also bring in things like the first electric school bus that was in Tacoma, and also electrification pushes to incentivize heat pumps, things like that, community-wide solar, wind power, all of these things that are progress that are being made on solutions, and the ways that these are being done justly, such as the air pollution. One of the things that a community group does is mutual aid to reduce those wedges. So community aid looks like air filters that you can pick up at a coffee shop. And so there's a coffee shop here in Seattle where people can donate air filters and HEPA filters, and then folks that need them can go and get them. And so that's helping to reduce those wedges and allowing, when I think back to that wedge diagram where I had that boulder, right? That reduces those wedges and helps those communities and the people in those communities to deal with the particulate matter pollution. And then this is just more examples of the things that we use. And I did want to make sure to show you just some of the data that Sonia and I have. We have been running this NSF grant for about a year now. We've got very diverse students. About half, a little more than half are cisgendered women. About 3% are non-binary, 44% male, and then smaller percentages of trans men, women, and genderqueer. Our students are very diverse, about 14% African American, about 4% Native American or Alaskan Native, and then about 44% white, 23% Asian, and then smaller percentages of Middle Eastern, Native Hawaiian, and Hispanic. For our students tend toward the older side. About half of them are in that typical 18 to 24-year-old range. And then another about 27% are in the 25 to 34. And then we have a number of students that are coming back that are in their 40s and even in their 50s. And then just more of the details on our demographics of our students. And then we did do some interviews with our students, but I want to show you some of the data. So when we asked our students what issues they're most concerned about in the world today, and this was a pre-survey, number one was climate change. Number two was racial inequality, and number three was mental health. Those were the top three concerns of our students. And these are urban students in Seattle and in Bellevue. And when we asked our students, do you feel like these issues are being taught or addressed in your courses? Over half said no. And this is, remember, this is the pre-survey. And we asked them, do you think it's important that your top issues of concern are taught and integrated into your courses? And almost 80% said yes. 40% said that this was very important, yes, and 39% said yes, somewhat important. So our students want climate, they want social justice issues in their courses. And then, let's see, there's a question in the chat. In the survey, are questions open-ended or do they select issues from a list? These are the list of issues. So there's a list that includes pollution, terrorism, racial inequality. There's a long list that they choose from, and then they choose their top three. And so the top three were climate change, racial inequality, and mental health in that order. So thanks for that question. And then we asked them about their desire. This is in the pre-surveys for community and civic engagement. And this was interesting. 75% want to be more socially, politically, and civically engaged in their communities. Only 25% said no. And when we asked them, okay, well, are you involved? Only 40% said that they were involved once or twice a year, and only 20% every few months. And a quarter of them, about 23%, have never volunteered but want to. So this points to they want to do this, they don't know how, or they don't have the tools, they don't know where to go to get involved. And then about 44% have never participated in any kind of a civil rights organization but want to. So our students have the desire to be involved in their communities, but they don't know how. And that's where, we're hoping that this work, and I think that it is according to at least our preliminary data. And then here's some pre and post comparisons. And again, these are not matched pairs because students don't always stay through the class the whole way. So our numbers at the beginning were about 170, and by the end, I think we had about 100 students for our N values. But in terms of percentages, when we asked our students, I see math and or science as a tool to help solve problems in our community, in communities I care about, 63% said they strongly agree before the class, and then 67% post. So not a big change there. But when we asked them, I see math or science as a tool that can serve racially and economic marginalized communities, those that strongly agreed went from less than half to 60% who saw math or science as a tool. And then this was another pretty big change. I see math or science as a tool for achieving social justice. And these were just the strongly agree. And I have the full data if you want to see it in a later slide, but it went from 42% who strongly agreed before to after the class 58%. So this I thought was a pretty significant change for the students to. And then I see math or science as useful for informing and taking civic action. And this one went from 48% before the class to 64% after. So our students definitely saw an increase in the usefulness for math and science for informing and taking civic action. And then this is just showing the N values for these. This is the pre, and this is the post for each of those. So it went from 62% to 67% for that first question. And this is just kind of showing the data for what I just showed you. And then gaps in understanding, structural systemic inequity, and agree about the need for equality, but there were gaps in understanding the causes of inequality. For instance, how much do you think climate change will harm groups of people that typically have less political or economic power, such as poor people, people of color, women, people with disabilities, children, and or people in developing countries? And before, about 77% of students said, yes, a great deal. So there was that understanding there even before they took the course of the disproportionate effects. And then post, even that went up to 85%. So this was pre at 77% and then post at 85%. To what extent do you agree with the following statement? We have to address social inequality to resolve the climate crisis. Pre was 38%, post was almost 60%, 59%. So this was a significant change in students who strongly agree that we have to address social inequality, so that climate justice piece to 59%. And then we had, I'm going to go ahead and skip over these because I want to move on to, so we had a narrative where students typed in what their understanding of disproportionate impacts for a case study. And so we just had some different ideas for students, whether they really understood it. And then connections between climate change and social justice, the degrees of student explanations, right? Whether they're taking action, responsibility, identifying political and economic drivers of power. So it just kind of tied into that. So pre and post again. To what extent do you agree with the following statements regarding climate justice? Students at the beginning of the class, when they were asked, do you understand climate justice? Only about 20% agreed that they knew what climate justice was. And by the end of the class, still, not even half, but in terms of the somewhat agree or strongly agree, we're over half now, about 80, we're at 52% somewhat agree and 42% are strongly agree, whereas before it was 48 and 19 or 48 and 20%. So we got an increase on both of those. I know how to become involved in climate justice issues. The strong, I'm pointing out here how many disagreed, right? So most of the students didn't know how to, and by the end, those numbers had dropped precipitously to well over 80% of students now agree that they know how to become involved with climate justice issues. So we saw an increase in that from a STEM class. This is following Sonia and my chemistry classes. And again, just that growth from 34 and 11% to 50% and 30% strongly agree. So big change there. And then these are just some post only. Learning about climate justice in my science or math course increased my motivation to learn science or math. And 80% of students after taking the class strongly agreed. And again, since doing a civic engagement activity in this course, I intend to get more involved in my community and in the support and in supporting causes I care about, such as protesting, voting, talking about issues, joining civil rights or political groups or action, social media campaigns and volunteering. And this was 73% that agreed with this statement when you put together the somewhat agree and strongly agree. And that's it. The only other thing I wanted to point out is there's also an emotional impact from the things that we teach in our classes, and to also recognize how we frame this. And I think that that's a discussion for us as faculty to also be having with each other, is how do we do that? And an organization that I helped co-found is called Talk Climate. Drop it in the chat. And it's a group of climate scientists, educators, and mental and medical health professionals who have come up with infographics and handouts on how to share climate information in developmentally appropriate ways. Talk Climate's focused a lot on K through 12, but it also, I think, relates to the work that we're doing with college students, because they're also feeling these eco-anxiety and climate anxiety around what's happening with their world, with our world. And with that, I'll go ahead and just open it up to questions and a discussion, I hope. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. This, I feel this talk is motivating me to just revisit my teaching in a deep way. I'm very inspired to think about what I can do better, and I just love the many examples. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
We should open it up for questions. So if people have questions, you can use your mic or use the chat.
Yeah, please. And while people are coming up with their questions, I can explain what these photos are. The photo on the left is me and a couple of chemistry professors at a chemistry conference back in 2019. We decided to do an impromptu Friday for Future protest in light of Greta Thunberg. And then on the right is my family at a climate strike here in Seattle.
So Charlie Anderson has a question. One
Yeah.
challenge we face at Penn State is strong taboos against political speech by faculty. You have suggestions for strategies to manage that limitation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's going to be on a state by state and college by college basis for what you are free to talk about. And I think this is also why it's so important to build bridges with your colleagues who are teaching in political science, in art, in history, in English, because they're doing this work. They're incorporating social justice issues into their courses. And we in the sciences, we're not. And we're so siloed, and we don't, by and large, we don't know how to do it. And so by working with our colleagues that are already doing this in their classes, we can learn how to do this in a way that it is, right, we're allowed to teach about issues. We're allowed to connect them to the real world. And we don't have to do it in a way that says, vote this way. Right? We of course, we cannot campaign. We cannot tell students to vote for a particular person, but we can educate them about what's going on in their world. And we can educate them about the connections between fossil fuel climate change and their math class, their chemistry classes, their biology classes.
I'll just add an addendum to that, which is that in a graduate course that I teach, I was bringing up COVID as an example of immunology. And I had a graduate student who was denying the existence of COVID in the class. So that's the kind of polarization that we sometimes face in our classes at Penn State.
Wow. Yeah, that's a real challenge. A great person whose writing I would recommend is Katharine Hayhoe. And she's at Texas Tech. She's a climate scientist, a colleague of mine, and she wrote a book called Saving Us. And it has some great tips on how to frame incorporating climate and climate justice into conversations, into our teaching in ways that doesn't polarize. She teaches at Texas Tech, which is in the most conservative city in Texas. And she really knows how to have these conversations in ways that doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't separate your students, or it's not as divisive, but it's still bringing up the topic. So that would be my recommendation. Look up Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Let me see if I spell it right. And the book that she wrote recently is called Saving Us.
Eric Marland included it in the chat.
Oh, thank you for dropping that in that link. Wonderful.
And I think that Katharine Hayhoe, we were fortunate to have Katharine Hayhoe speak here at Penn State sometime before the pandemic. I can't remember.
Oh, that must have been a treat. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in 2019. I had the pleasure to actually have a meal with her when you could still do that.
Oh, fantastic.
More comments or questions?
Eric, your hand is still up. Did you have another question?
I did. I wanted to bring up actually something along those lines. You have these great ideas for educating the students, and I've become very interested recently in the ideas that Katharine Hayhoe talks about in her book, which is once you have some information, how do you communicate that with other people that are in different places, different audiences, different ages, without pushing them away, and trying to perhaps make an effort at understanding where their misconceptions or where those views come from, and not just perhaps making an assumption of that they're inherently wrong. And I wonder if you have. So I've been teaching a class related to this, but I'm just wondering if you have additional ideas on resources or ideas on how to keep us from pushing people away in the process of trying to do something good.
Yeah, that is such a good question, because we do risk, if we push on people in our lives, if we push on our students, of it backfiring. And I see this in my own family, and I've heard Katharine talk about it, that, we have climate deniers in our own families. I've got, one in my own family, and I'm a climate scientist. And for them, it's ideological, and there's not a whole lot we can do. It's that you look at Anthony Leisowitz's work on the global warming 6 Americas, and that small 10% of the dismissives, which we also call climate deniers, it's ideological for them. It's like asking a duck to become a dog. They are set in their ideology, and climate change is one of those topics that is actually more divisive than most other topics, even more divisive than abortion. And so for those small 10%, there's not a lot we can do. And we're seeing that with COVID as well, right? There are that small 10%, sounds like there was a grad student even, who just thinks it's a hoax. And so those folks, don't worry about them. They're a small percentage. There's the rest of the 90% that we can have conversations with, that we can motivate to action, particularly, right? We're now at 50% of Americans being either alarmed or concerned about climate. And the thing that's missing, and I didn't show this data, but Anthony has it, that only about 4% of those folks that are in that category are actually doing anything, right? You and I, we're part of that small percentage that are doing something. We're connecting it in our classes. We're talking about it. We're having conversations with our colleagues. But for most people who are alarmed, they don't know what to do. And so that's that piece of giving our students the tools to be civically engaged, to have conversations at home. And I think that one of the ways to keep from it backfiring is to connect with people on things that we both care about. For instance, when I talk with my family members who I know are climate skeptics, I frame it around health. I frame it around asthma. I frame it around the health impacts, because that is what compels them. I can't talk about climate change, but I can talk about how methane in the home is a trigger for asthma, for pediatric asthma. And then that motivates them to get gas out of their home and to get an induction stove next, or to get a heat pump rather than when they need to replace their gas furnace. So I think it's using terminology that's not going to trigger that ideological divide. I don't know if that helps at all, Eric.
No, it does. I have somebody in my office that is against vaccines, and after talking to them for a while, I discovered that, well, one of their children was in ICU for a week or two due to an earlier vaccine. And so trying to talk to them about vaccines is a very different conversation than someone who doesn't have that very personal experience. And in this person's case, I decided, that might be the right thing for you to not get the vaccine, because, you're weighing benefits and costs, and your assessment is very different than mine and other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's all about building a connection with people and having those conversations wherever they're at. Yeah, and we're all going to come at it from a different place for sure. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have other ideas about how you've done this in your classes or even in daily life with family or friends?
So there's a very cool book by Alan Alda, which is a strange source, but it's called "If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face?" And it does a little bit more of the, how do you get practice to do what Catherine Hayhoe was talking about?
That's great. I will look that up. Alan Alda is a funny, funny man.
But I'm always looking for new things, and you've certainly given us a huge number of resources and ideas. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the templates that Sonia and I use with the faculty we work with, we are happy to share those. We've got a chapter that's going to be coming out in a book soon that also has some of the resources that we have as well. But dropped a link, I think, to the Google Slides. So if you want to grab those templates, you're welcome to. If you want to do a workshop like that with your faculty, happy to help with that.
And we can post this link on our MAA website as well.
Yeah, please do. It's a view only, so I'm not sure if it's possible to pull the slides, but you could just ask me. I'm happy to share those template slides as well.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your time. And as I mentioned, we'll be posting this recording as well, and I'll give you a link to that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Been really wonderful for me. I've learned a lot. So.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear that. Yeah, and if you have any feedback, this work is really a passion of Sonia and mine, and we're constantly updating it. The templates that you saw today are different than when I taught it during the winter. So we're constantly changing it and updating it. So if anybody has ideas or has feedback about even questions, things like that, we're happy to continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm ending the recording, I think.